Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today we're joined by Loïs Mills, Senior Content Lead at Yonder. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. I think you're the second guest from Yonder.
I am.
We had Tom on maybe mid last year. It was just after he'd done the big Out of Home campaign.
Yeah.
That went really, really well. And his episode was a hit. So no pressure at all.
No pressure, but mine had better do better than his. Otherwise, I'm gonna be mad. He sent me his to listen to when I told him I was coming on this. He was like, "Oh, you must have heard my episode." I was like, "No, actually, I have not." And to this day, I've still not listened to it because I was like, I don't want to be influenced. I don't want him to set my bar. So this lives in isolation. But please listen to mine first. His second. Although I'm sure his is amazing as well.
And so anyone listening today, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the share button once it's on LinkedIn, so Lois can get more downloads than Tom. Well, let's jump in. Can you just share a little bit more about yourself and your journey so far?
Gosh, I never know where to begin with these questions. I have had what I didn't coin this term. I heard it one time and it's stuck with me for life. Something of a bit of a squiggly CV. My career path has definitely not been linear. I came out of uni having done fashion and I thought I was going to be, a big shot fashion editor working in magazines. I worked for a model agency for a little bit, not as a model, but as a model booker, and really thought that that's where my journey was going to go. I think luckily, as journalism has declined hugely over the last 10, 15 years, I'm very glad I didn't end up in that path, but somehow fell into the world of brand design, content, and then about 5 years ago, landed my feet in a really amazing startup. I was employee number one, just worked with the two founders before the product even came out, and that I think has just ignited, I suppose, like my startup spark. That sounds so wanky, but I think everyone has to do one to then be like, this is for me, or it really, really isn't for me. And luckily, just before I did a startup, I'd had my own business before, so I kind of got that a little bit of a taste of what it was like to really hustle and work hard and not in a box type role, and then had gone to a huge global agency and worked with, however many people in a very corporate role and thought, absolutely bloody not. This is not the life for me. So yeah, jumped ship a couple of times, been at a couple of startups, and then I kind of have a very, how did I find myself here moment of working for a credit card startup. It's not the straightforward journey from fashion to credit, but I'm really glad I made it.
I do want to dig into the similarities and differences between sort of non-fintech and fintech, but before we do that, for everyone listening, if you haven't heard of Yonder, tell us more about Yonder, who they are, what they do, and then also your role as senior content lead over there as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Yonder, in its kind of, I guess, bite-sized format, it's a credit card for modern explorers. But what we're trying to do, we are a startup and it is fintech and it is credit. But our whole mission really, from my perspective anyway, is to change the way that the world sees credit. I think traditionally, there haven't been that many challenges in the space. There's a lot of big incumbents. I think the UK's, relationship and attitude towards credit is somewhat of a seesaw, depending on who you ask and depending on what stage of life that you're in. But our job really is to make, credit more rewarding for people and to try and, reestablish people's relationship with credit in a way that makes sense for them and in a way that's actually beneficial for them as well. I won't name drop any of the big names, but all of the big kind of reward credit cards that are out there, they're not that good. Your dad probably used them and you probably thought, oh yeah, that's good. That's a nice little status symbol, but they don't actually work for people in the modern world. So like our whole role is, how can we shake that up and do things a bit differently? And then I guess going into my role of like, okay, then how do we do that online and on socials? My role, I guess, is to get people to see Yonder as something else beyond that, as to see Yonder as a 3-dimensional brand and going above and beyond just being a product, which is something that I think all content marketers should be doing anyway. You're not, I personally don't believe that you should ever be selling the product. That's not the role of social, and that's not the role of organic or like created media. But not does that correctly. And I definitely am not necessarily writing the rules on how you should be a good content marketer. But yeah, I see my role very much as how do we create Yonder as more than just a product and to give it a bit of life beyond just being a credit card.
You said the role of a content marketer is to not sell the product via sort of social and organic. So conversely, then, what is the role?
I know, someone will probably troll me in the comments for saying that and be like, that is your job. On paper, if you were to report to a CEO or a growth lead, of course, when it all boils down to it, on paper, that is technically your job. Your job is to get more eyeballs on your brand. My very strong opinion is that content is not the tool to do that. Content is the tool to get your brand out there, to build brand awareness, to build brand love, to create positive brand sentiment. Hopefully you're not creating negative brand sentiment with what you're doing, but to create conversations around what you're doing, not for me to sit here and be like, hey, get this credit card today. That has a place. Sure, that's more like paid social and advertising. And, I still believe you can do a show them, not tell them. I think what it leaves people to do is to be much more creative with how you talk about the product, how you market the product, and actually what are you saying beyond the product. There are 7,000 credit cards, let's say, in a lineup, but what is making your product different? And that goes for credit cards, it goes for beauty, it goes for skincare. I've worked in cleaning before. Like, you could apply that same principle to any brand that you work in, but I think the fundamental is the same, that actually, if you're working in content, you should be creating content that either is educational or it's entertaining, but either way, it should be creating a conversation. People aren't sat on their phones on their lunch break to think, I know what I want to do with this precious 20 minutes. I want to shop for a credit card. Maybe there's a time and a place that they are ready to do that, but more often than not, they're looking for a bit of escapism. They're looking to be entertained, and they're looking to then, have a bit of joy to share with their mates, or then to talk to the person when they go back to their desk, like, oh, did you see that video? Did you see this? That's what I believe really good content can do.
That's really interesting. I think lots of things kind of come to mind, as you were speaking. I think two things really. The first is you've obviously mentioned social a lot as sort of part of the content, and I think there's been a move away from what we traditionally saw as content as being sort of written content, blogs, articles, and kind of all of that sort of stuff, versus kind of what is being seen as content now, which is TikTok videos and content on Instagram and posts on LinkedIn and kind of all of those sort of bits and pieces. I mean, in your view, can a brand in today's day and age not produce social content and still gain a following, or do you think it's an absolute must?
It's a really, really interesting question. I think about this a lot at the moment in terms of where our brand shows up. I think fundamentally where I would start if I was thinking about this problem again is, number one, where is your audience? And then on from that, you need to meet them where they're at. So I think there's, for example, I guess when I was in a previous role and I was working for an eco cleaning startup, again, not a straightforward path from cleaning to credit, but it is what it is. It was really in the early stages of TikTok gaining momentum. It was in the pandemic and lockdown, and TikTok, obviously, it's been around since 2016, but it had a huge, surge in 2020. Well, our demographic or our core audience technically were not on TikTok. People were saying, oh, TikTok is just for Gen Zs and dancers. Not true. A huge number of, boomers and Gen X and millennials are all on TikTok, and actually they make up a huge demographic. But I think it's trying to meet people where they're at. I think the mistake that people make when we're coming back to the question of saying, can brands afford not to be on, I guess, doing Instagram Reels and TikToks, is what can you do well with the resources that you've got? I think if you're a one-person team, you're leading the whole content strategy and you're doing all the in-house marketing and you don't have any budget, to assume that you would be on TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook, YouTube, writing blog posts, doing podcasts, I think, is ambitious, and something that Tom, who is my manager and who's been on the podcast before, he always encourages us to do less but do it really, really well. Because I think if you spread yourself too thin just because, you know, your competitor is showing up on TikTok, you're not going to make a dent at all. And in fact, you probably do more bad than you will good, because if someone sees your videos and they're a bit shit and they're not really doing anything, that's probably more detrimental to your brand than it is showing up and doing something very creative. I think everyone should allow themselves the freedom to appear on those spaces in an authentic way. If you don't have the capacity to do that, then I just wouldn't bloody do it personally.
I'm 100% in agreement with that. And I think that, you know, I don't think that's just restricted to content production over socials. I think that's true for your pay media budget, you know, rather than sort of trying to distribute a smaller budget or a tight budget. Or in fact, it doesn't necessarily need to be a small budget. You could have $100,000 a month budget. But if you're then putting that across, say, 5 different platforms across 5 different countries, you know, that's what, $4,000 a platform in each country. You're spreading yourself really, really thin then. And you're better off owning a particular channel and doing it really, really well. So yeah, no, 100% agreement in that. And I think like that point around being a one person or a smaller marketing department and making that, you know, that choice between being across all the channels versus doing one channel, it can feel a little bit like you're missing out on some of your audience because you're not everywhere. But I think, like you said, you know, doing something sort of, you know, 75% good, 50% good, rather than doing it 120% amazing. I think just come to terms with that. And then obviously then satisfying, you know, founder / other stakeholder demands, potentially ego as well at the same time. And I think that needs to be kept in check. I kind of mentioned this as you were kind of talking a bit about your background, which is your sort of non-fintech experience versus your sort of fintech experience. And I'd be really, really keen to kind of understand how you think your pre-Yonder career has sort of influenced your role at Yonder. Why you think you're doing perhaps a better job than some of the other credit card providers out there?
I think, interestingly, sometimes what people can believe as their biggest weaknesses can often be their biggest strength. So in my example, I'd never worked in fintech before. To be really transparent, wouldn't say I had a fantastic relationship with money or with credit. I didn't have a fantastic understanding of credit cards or the market. I admitted when I joined Yonder, we had an onboarding session. I held up my hand and I said, you know, it took me years and years and years and years to pay off a previous credit card that I'd had, not because I didn't have the funds, but I didn't really understand how it worked. I just thought it could just sit there and I could pay the interest off forevermore, and it didn't really matter. And, you know, I didn't know a lot about credit scores. And in a way, there's probably a lot of people who would sit back and say, well, why on earth would you work at a credit card startup? That makes no sense at all. But I think where some people would see, I guess, you know, like a weakness or a challenge, personally, I believe to be a really amazing opportunity, because you bring a completely different perspective than anyone else who might go there. I think if you just hire like for like and you hire the same type of people for the same type of roles, you're just going to get the same outcome and you're just going to get the same type of work. Whereas, you know, and it applies for my role, but also any hiring decision, if you can bring in a wider demographic and people from different backgrounds and different experiences who've done different jobs, actually you suddenly get like a lot more texture within the picture rather than just like an outline of what the role should be. So I think even me coming in as, you know, someone who's looking after all of our content, yes, I haven't done content for a credit card specifically before, but the role's not really about that. The role is, how can you create content for our brand? How can you build brand awareness for the brand? How can you create love for the brand? The product could be an egg. The job is still the job. You're just changing up, you know, different skills and different thought processes and applying that to what you're doing. So, you know, having my background of working, like I said before, in design agencies and then at a cleaning startup and then temporarily at like a beauty startup, all of these things actually fed into what I know works and what I know doesn't work, and about audience building and about creating engaging content and how to do things that are entertaining, not necessarily linked back to financial education. But all these things, I believe, can be learned in any role. You'll always have to learn about the brand. You'll always have to learn about the audience, and you'll always have to figure it out whilst you're on the job, what works and what doesn't work. So actually, not having that, 10-year, 7 finance companies on my CV, I don't really think that mattered. I think it probably benefited it for me to come in and be like, actually, people don't know about credit. So why are we assuming that they do? Actually, when we're talking about this, why are we talking about that? Because the average person on the street, they've got no bloody idea what APR means, for example. So you offer a little bit of a fresh perspective sometimes in your I guess maybe in your ignorance.
So prior to running the agency, I was marketing director at a brokerage trading platform, and the entire industry had basically been, you'd go in and start working at one trading platform, and then you'd basically just bounce around all the different brands. And that's gone on for years, and it's still true to this day, right? There's still, you kind of got like your traditional incumbent trading platforms, but like the new brands that have kind of popped up, like Shares and Bucks, and like, I think why they've done really, really well, Free Trade, Robinhood as well, is they've brought in marketers from outside of the industry to reach new audiences in new ways. And a lot of the sort of incumbent sort of financial services companies are still running the same marketing strategy that they have done for years, which is out-of-home advertising, supported with Google search, and then a sprinkling of TV, and they might do a little bit of Meta.
Yeah.
That's kind of like and they've only added Meta on the last couple of years or so as well, so not even that interesting. But when you look at some, company like Shares, and they've dominated on TikTok.
Yeah.
And because of that, their cost per acquisition is cheaper and all the rest of it, but they're also reaching different audiences as well. And I think, kind of going, sort of circling back to sort of Yonder, what's interesting, you talk about, Yonder being a different type of credit card and having cut through. And I think a lot of that is also down to the fact that you're hitting an audience ever been served or serviced by the existing credit card brand, because they don't fit their typical targeting criteria. For whatever reason, they're not on the Waterloo line, and they're not reading Money Week, and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned, obviously, that the job of a content marketer isn't to sell the product directly on the social channels. Obviously, you're looking for engagement and you're looking to draw attention. I suppose a lot of that as well is about building community as well.
Yeah, massively. I think community is really important for any brand, and you can always tell when brands neglect it or aren't genuinely interested in it. I think creating good content is one thing, but if you don't have a community there, I guess almost it's like your real standard baseline of like a strong community who believe in your product, they support what you're doing. It's really hard to get any kind of long-term brand love or brand stickiness. And I think brand stickiness is a really interesting one when you think about community and the world that we live in, and that, I feel like a new brand in any category pops up. There's probably one a minute, probably one a second. There's always a new brand. There's always someone new on the block doing something kind of the same, but ever so slightly different. And it doesn't take a lot for people these days who are not particularly loyal to brands like we used to be maybe back in, I don't know, I'm going to say the 90s, but I was born in the 90s, maybe even earlier than that, where you had like your favorite car brand and you had your favorite paint brand, and I'm trying to think of brands maybe people loved, whatever they were. People had a one-stop shop for everything, and it was very, very rare that people would switch. And that was, I guess, like an early stage view of a brand community. Whereas now, especially in online spaces, it's a lot easier for people to not feel particularly loyal to one brand. But on the flip side, to build a genuine community, and I think to really embed yourself in people's lives, is a really, really powerful tool. It means that you get almost instant feedback, both positively and negatively, of what you're doing really well, what's resonating, what kind of sits right with them. But on the flip side, if you do something that doesn't resonate, or that is off brand in any way, shape or form, if you've got the tone wrong, if you've missed the moment, if actually you're not hitting them at the right time, at the right spot, they'll be the first to let you know. And I think if you don't have that really solid base community and you're not getting that feedback, both positive and negative, you're kind of going to develop a lot slower, in my opinion. You don't have that kind of core audience who are going to back you. And I think when we're thinking about content, and again, it's very easy to just assume all content is, TikTok or Instagram, but in this scenario, it's probably a really relevant reference. I guess people can be very savage in comment sections, but where I think you can really tell of a brand investing in their community is, are they engaging with that community? Are people having genuine conversations? Are comments just being posted and they're left in the ether? If someone's saying something challenging or asking a question, is that being addressed? And I think where a lot of people who work in content and are constantly sat trying to think of new ideas and trying to think of new videos, and it is a relentless kind of creative struggle that I think a lot of content marketers get. But your comment section and where your community are at, that's your baseline for nearly all of your content. And if you really, really harbor that and build your community first, that can serve you as like a content strategy time and time and time again, because your community are telling you what they want to see. They're showing up for you. They're literally hand feeding you the content that they find interesting, that they want to resonate with, that they're sharing with their mates, that they're talking about at work. That is where I think there's a real missed opportunity for people who think about community as thus, your followers. And I think very often brands, especially, people higher up in, the stakeholder chain, they assume that if you've got a lot of followers, you've got a big community. And that is not true at all. You can see brands who've got tens of thousands of followers on socials in theory, and they get like 3 comments. And it's very easy now because you can be deceptive. You can hide, the like count on things. You can turn off the so that no one's really evaluating you. And so you can kind of hide behind the wall of, oh no, our metrics are an illusion. And I think metrics are often very vanity based. And so I don't love leading with metrics first as a way to measure how successful your brand is or isn't online. But I think you also can't ignore them. We don't live in like a little vacuum of being like, oh, well, I think it did good, so it must be a great video. Like there is a very obvious, cause and reaction of what you're posting and how people are responding to it. And if you're a brand with, I don't know, 2,000 followers, but you have 200 comments on every single video, actually, you're probably going to do much, much better in terms of your content strategy than someone who has 2 million followers and gets 20 comments on a video, because your community obviously isn't there and they probably just don't care about your brand. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on why community building is very important when you're thinking about your content strategy. I don't think they live in isolation at all.
You mentioned a lot fundamentally about engagement rate. We do this all the time, and we're still talking about influencer activity for clients. And we say to them, there's engagement rate, but then there's also there's quantitative element and the qualitative element, right? There's the amount of engagement you're getting, and then what's the quality of it? So, are they talking about the influencer's hairstyle and what clothes they're wearing, or are they talking about the product that they're promoting? I'd be really keen to kind of understand from you, how do you measure success and then ultimately the impact of your sort of content marketing efforts, for all of the activity that you're doing?
It's a stunning question. It's something I think about almost every single week. One, because it's my job to report back in meetings, but number 2, I think depending on who asks and depending on who you're talking to, this answer probably changes quite a lot. I think, if you're thinking about, if I'm reporting up to, a CEO or the VP of marketing, whatever, people at that level want to see what is the direct impacts of us posting on TikTok every day, for example. And I don't post on TikTok every day. At that level, people want to see increase in followers, increase in engagement across your videos. And how you measure engagement, I think you have to really define for your brand. Some people, it will be, how many likes and comments are we getting? For us personally, I think actually comments are not necessarily that valuable at the moment. I think actually saves is really important. You used to be able to see who, how many shares a video got. Unfortunately, because of privacy rules, you can't see that anymore, which I think is a real shame. But who's saving the video? Who wants to come back to that later because they really liked it or they want to watch it again? Or it's the type of thing, I personally react on social media is, if I see something that I really like, I'll save it because I want to show someone later. But like, oh yeah, there was this video of this dog, and I won't ever be able to find it again. So I've saved it because I want to come back to it. So, you know, I think it's working out what matters to you and how you're measuring your own content success. So what I'm doing will probably be very different to someone else. But for us, it's, you know, are people liking it? Are people saving it? And are we seeing an increase either video on video, month on month, quarter on quarter? You know, is it going in the trajectory that we want it to go in? And if not, why not? And what are the best performing pieces of content? And I think there's a tendency sometimes to zoom too far in, but also to zoom too far out. And I think actually you kind of need to do both and trust the relationship between themselves. If you look at one piece of content in isolation and it tanks, that doesn't mean that the content is really bad. It could have been the hook was wrong at the beginning. It could be the time of day that you posted it, or the time, you know, there's something was going on in the world that was more important, or, you know, it was Christmas Day, so why were you posting a video anyway? It could be a bunch of things that actually don't necessarily reflect the content or your audience or your strategy. So I think being able to zoom out and say, okay, if we've tested this video 3 times, 6 times, 9 times, and it's still performing really poorly in terms of whatever we deem successful or not, then that's cause for reflection. But I had a really interesting conversation actually with head of social. I'm not sure if it's head of social, head of content at Gordon Ramsay restaurant group. And I was showing her our content, and I really try and make a concerted effort every single month to go for coffee with someone who I admire, who doesn't work in necessarily the same space, but who works in content or social or something, just to see what they're doing. What am I learning? What am I doing wrong? And I was showing her some of our content at Yonder, and I was saying, oh, you know, I'm not seeing the results that I would like to see, given the effort that we're putting in and given the hypothesis that I'd created around what would be successful and what wouldn't. And she said something so interesting to me. She was like, okay, well, how many times did you post that style of content? I said, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3. She was like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let you sit with what you've just said. You're saying that something's not successful because you've tried it 2 or 3 times and you've decided, no, okay, that's not successful. And I think that's because we're so conditioned in like such a fast paced kind of social environment to say like, right, try this, throw it out there. If it doesn't stick, move away and try again. And actually, so many people probably haven't seen that video. You can't post something, a 50-second video, twice, not see any result, or use that result as gospel for then how you decide, you know, what direction your content strategy should go in. So I think even remembering to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of, you know, your following, your engagement, likes, saves, whatever that is for you on whatever platform, and you know, how we measure success varies platform to platform. Because I think also there's no point saying, oh, well, you know, we got 100 followers on TikTok last week, but only 1,000 on whatever else. Their platforms behave differently. So you've got to think of them separately as well. And I think as another level on that, which is something that is slightly less measurable, and it depends if if you're rich enough to invest in social listening tools and all of that stuff, which we currently are not investing in just because we don't necessarily see we can get enough data without needing to invest in platforms like that. But what is the brand sentiment? Who's talking about your brand? In what context? Is it positive? Is it negative? Are people kind of reaching out to you directly? And I think the beauty of working at a startup, and especially, you know, in an earlier stage startup, people will tell you. We will have customers and we will have members and we'll have our community tell us if they like something or not. We posted a video for our city expansion launch, I think 2 weeks ago. It was no different really to the rest of the content we've been making, but it had a different angle. It was shot differently. We turned it around in 24 hours. And people were telling, we had so many inbound messages from our members, from random people on LinkedIn, from people in Slack communities, sharing the video, telling us they liked the video, saying that it was really funny. Similarly, if something goes out that people don't like, 1, you'll either hear silence, or 2, people will tell you. They'll be like, this video is shit. Doesn't take a lot for a message to get back to you when you're in a small company. So I think that's to not be ignored, even though that is slightly harder to report up in a marketing meeting of being like, oh, well, you know, 5 people said that they really loved it, therefore it must have been a great video.
Yeah.
So it's
and that thing that always feels like it's not, you know, quantifiable. You know, it feels like it's anecdotal, and so therefore it's not worth communicating. But you know, if you are doing something and you get a you get a response from that, then like, I mean, we did these football shirts I think it might be a couple of years back now. And we got like all the logos of all the fintech companies, and we sort of pushed it out. And it was like the day after like Coinbase done that Super Bowl ad and stuff. And I mean, we got loads and likes and shares and all the rest of it, which was really, really good. But actually, the bit that made it a successful campaign was I started getting a lot of DMs from prospects, people within the industry, and then people I'd been speaking to, prospective clients who have been pitching and whatnot, had actually then made the effort to email me to say that they saw the campaign, they really like it. And, I think anyone can sort of agree with this. You know how much effort it is to write somebody an email out of the blue to say you saw something on another platform and that you like it?
100%.
That's like, that to me is like, okay, well, if that one, those one or two individuals did that, then there's probably about half a dozen that liked it overall, right? So,
100%.
I think like it's being holistic about how you're looking at these sorts of things.
100%. And that's the thing, it's always going to be a mix. And I think, like what you're saying about people taking the time to email, word of mouth is such an underrated way to measure brand success and brand sentiment. And, luckily for us, because we're a membership kind of based platform, I suppose, is we can see directly, who's signing up, who's doing what. And I guess it's the same as if you had a product and you were doing sales, are your sales going up or down? But being able to measure, organic traffic and word of mouth traffic, whilst, you don't exactly know if they saw your TikTok video or if their friends showed it to them on their phone or if they saw a YouTube kind of video, whatever it is, you don't necessarily know directly, but all these things ladder up to top of funnel growth. And that really is the aim of content. It's not actually to convert someone, especially if you're a considered product like a credit card. It's not my role specifically to make sure that someone sees a piece of content and immediately signs up for a credit card. That isn't my role. My role is to make sure that we are top of mind and people are aware of Yonder, so that if the time comes that they would like a credit card, Yonder comes to their head first. Like, actually, I saw a couple of videos that they did and I loved it, or I read this hilarious blog post that they did, or my friend shared a YouTube clip with me. That's where, that's a real successful measure of content, in my opinion. Whether it's like directly measurable in graphs 24/7 is another story, but yeah, that's how I feel.
We always have a similar conversation around sort of running brand awareness campaigns, particularly for brands that are really heavy into affiliate, because the acquisition cost on affiliate is always really, really good and it's very, very difficult to compete with. But what happens is you run brand awareness campaigns and then they start looking at the conversion metrics. Well, hold on a second. We're not running a conversion focused campaign here. We're running a brand awareness campaign here. And the purpose of that is to elevate your brand so that when, as a good example, when, someone who's looking to renew their insurance goes on to compare the market, puts in the details, and your brand is third from the top, that they choose to go with your brand versus the other two that are marginally cheaper.
Exactly.
Because they've seen your content, your ads, or whatever it is, and they feel comforted by that, and you built up trust with that audience, and so they've chosen to go with you.
Yeah.
And I think, like, when it kind of comes down to kind of like justifying expenditure on these sorts of channels and stuff, I think you've got to, like I said, you've got to zoom in and look at the cost of it, on a channel by channel basis, on a at an individual level. How much is it costing us to run these campaigns, push this content out, all the rest of it?
Yeah.
But I think as well, at the same time, you've got to zoom out. And my first check is, what's our total spend versus total number of signups?
Yeah.
Is that on target? If the answer is yes, okay, then you don't really have a problem at that point. If it's a bit high, whatever it is, then you should go into the individual channels. But, should you really be trying to establish the ROI on a post that, let's be honest, doesn't talk anything about a credit card and it's about something really, really random? Like, what are you expecting to achieve from that?
100%. I think what you said about if you're in an audience and you're on a comparison site and people are choosing you even though you're the third one down, it's because you've made them feel something at some point in that journey up to that moment. The risk is always not making people feel anything and being bland and just kind of blurring into the background. And so many brands don't make you feel anything, that you don't care who you go with because you're like, oh yeah, I'll just go for the cheapest one. But like I love that example actually. If you're, the third down in the list and people are still picking you, it's because you've created some sort of emotion in them. Either it's, intrigue or joy or trust, like you said, if you've made them feel something to the point that they would pick you or think about you when the moment came for them to need your product, that's the real win, probably, of like all that brand building up until that moment of conversion, which, yeah, I guess unless you put a form, when they complete saying, oh, how did you feel about our brand before today? Maybe you would never know exactly what that ROI is, but yeah.
Yeah, but when has ever any of those forms actually given any real information? And my favourite
People lie.
is like, oh, where did you hear about us? Oh, and look, everyone saw us on TV. It's like, yeah, because that's the first one on the list, so they just click that. It's just,
so true. It's so true.
It's like, is it really? Yeah, anyway,
I know.
before we kind of move on to the quick fire round, I think the one question I really, really want to ask you, I've got a whole bunch of questions here, but I think maybe for me personally, but I think also probably for the majority of people listening to this, how do you sort of ensure that your content stands out? But ultimately, I think the question I'm asking you is that how do you get cut through with your content? How are you drawing eyeballs? What's your magic formula?
Oh my God, I wish I had a magic formula. I wish I had a little secret sauce, I will be so honest and say that I don't think I've cracked the formula yet, but I think I've got the ingredients right. If I'm making like this amazing content cake that creates, the best tasting content ever. God, I've really gone down the wrong analogy. But let's say it's a cake or a soup, whatever. Make what you want. I feel like the ingredients I know. I'm not sure exactly what quantity to put them in yet, but I think core ingredient number one is you have to do something different. I think it's really easy to look at what your competitors are doing as a really amazing example. For us it would be like, what are what are Monzo doing? What are Starling doing? What are Amex doing? What are, I don't know, bloody NatWest doing? Look at your landscape and say, okay, what are they doing? Okay, let's do that. And let's do it slightly differently, but let's copy and paste what they're doing. That is the wrong, in my opinion, the complete wrong approach. The right approach should be, okay, what brands do we love? Who do we get energy from? Is it Nike? Is it Red Bull? Red Bull are an amazing example of doing something completely different to, the rest of their competitors. How can you think like a brand that's not in your space? Is it the best beauty brand? Is it the best sports brand? Is it the best lifestyle brand? How can you take learning outside of your space and apply them to what you're doing? Because actually, if you're just going to do, another version of what's been done before, you'll never get cut through because people aren't going to know your content from your next competitors. And so why would you do that? And I think some people say, oh, because it works and because they've got loads of customers and they've got loads of followers. But yes, so what? They've built that growing over here. But if you want to be over here, you can't be doing this shit over here because it's not going to work unless you have a shit ton of money or you can do stuff bigger and better than anyone else. But if you're a new challenger brand, you don't. So how can you do something totally different so you're playing in a completely different ball game would be, tip number one. Tip number two, I think, especially in, a really crowded fintech market, would be to use people. Ultimately, and I know I've just gone on about how, you shouldn't see content as like an immediate conversion tool, but ultimately people buy from people. People don't buy from brands. If you have two pieces of content and one is, a real sales led video that just shows the product and just bangs on about the product, I would bet you don't see many click-throughs, you don't see much engagement, and you probably ultimately don't actually see much conversion laced down the funnel from that piece of content. If the same brand had, a member of their team or the CEO or, someone on their design team talking about why they built the product and about how it changes people's life and it was about them in situ, that video would do miles better because automatically you're creating a feeling, you're building trust, you're getting, an actual human connection on there. And I think especially in, financial services, trust is a huge issue. People don't trust banks or financial businesses or tech, especially because they just believe that everyone on the other end is a robot anyway. So how can you be, you're a human brand. There are people behind what you're posting. How can you bring light to those people? Because if you think about someone on the other end of the phone looking at it, they're a bloody person as well. So how can you create that nice little human to human connection through the screen and actually, I guess create a bit of cut through and cause a bit of emotion. I mean, I literally just did a 5-hour course on building emotion and storytelling in videos, and I think it seems like such a core and such an easy topic, and yet it's so often missed by brands trying to sell rather than to make people feel something, which ultimately is going to create so much more cut through and is going to last a memory. It's like the classic stories that you get about when you're delivering a pitch, how you should be telling a story because that's how people remember things and then tell it on and tell it on and tell it on. The same goes for content. How can you tell a story or create an emotion that makes someone feel something to then either go tell someone else or watch it again, or at least be left with a memory of what they've just seen, rather than just be like, okay, yeah, next, don't care. I didn't need a credit card anyway. Like that would be my ingredients for the content cake.
That's fantastic. So before I let you go, I'm going to take you through our quick fire round. What podcast are you listening to right now, other than obviously the FML podcast?
Obviously, this one, number one, and obviously my colleague Tom's episode will be top of that list. Obviously, to be honest, this is really bad. I went through a stage of going through a lot of podcasts, and then I got a bit bored of podcasts, which is ironic because I'm now talking on one. So I'm actually just going to subtly self-promote one that I'm guest hosting at the moment, which is called the Poodcast, which is a podcast about bowel and bladder issues, which I just think is very unique. So I'd recommend that. That's what I listen to in my spare time.
I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that. I knew you were on a podcast. I didn't know that was going to be the topic. Other than Yonder, what's your favourite fintech product, brand, or app?
It's such a good question. I've got three that come to mind. There's one called Belong that I don't know if they've actually officially launched now or if I'm just on the wait list of like the pre-launch, but there's an app called Belong, which is helping millennials to build wealth, which I find really fascinating. I found investing, I haven't invested really in anything. I know very little about that landscape. So I think any fintech brand that's kind of modernizing it and making it accessible for a new audience, especially millennials, to me just really excites me and really interests me. There's Female Invest, which is like a community learning hub for female investment, which I love. I'm actually doing an event with them while I'm listening to an event. They've got Mary Portas on next week, I think, and I just think that's also fascinating. Again, just trying to make what feels like stuffy, inaccessible content much more accessible. And then there's another one which I haven't downloaded yet, but I've seen it on my Instagram and TikTok loads, and I follow them. It's called Meet Margot, and I think it's like a mortgage app. So if they do loads of educational stuff about mortgage rates, remortgaging, and I think their whole thing is trying to reinvent that mortgage process for people. Again, taking something maybe very male dominated, very stuffy, very like, oh, you have to be in the know to know the stuff, and just making it so much more accessible. So yeah, those three come to mind for me.
What books are you currently reading or would you recommend?
Do you know what I've recently learned about myself? This is always a growth journey. I realized after buying so many that I hate nonfiction books. I get so bored. I've tried to read so many. I never finish them. I bought How to Fail by Elizabeth Day. I've got one here, the Dr. Julie Smith book. I can't see what it's called. Something about therapy. I tried to read that. I can never finish them because I find them so dull. So actually 2 books I've read recently, I just finished Yellowface, which is amazing. I would recommend it. It's such a good read, so juicy, and you'll fly through it. And I'm currently reading I'm Sorry You Feel That Way by Rebecca Waite that a colleague told me to read. Hot tip, don't listen to colleagues' book recommendations, because if you don't like it, it will feel like a piece of homework and you've got to get through it because you want to show to them that you trust their recommendation. But it has taken me a while to read this book. So I'd recommend Yellowface, but I'm currently reading I'm Sorry You Feel That Way.
Amazing. And my last question, probably my favourite as well. What's one thing that I haven't asked you that I perhaps should have?
Maybe like what's one hack, especially as a content creator and a content lead, maybe what's one hack to staying sane when you spend all of your life online?
What is that one hack that you would recommend or suggest?
Get offline. Get offline. Get offline. I booked this morning to go feed the baby lambs at Surrey Dock Farm at the weekend. So I think, try and find some nice wholesome moments offline, because it's so easy to spend your whole life on your phone because it's your job from 9 till 5, but no job is 9 to 5. It's more like, 7 till 7. And then you're wanting to socialize on there. And I also have my own personal TikTok about gut health. So I'm posting on that. It is relentless. So I think making sure that you do a lot of analog stuff in your life. So like I read physical books. I don't have a Kindle. I would never buy a Kindle. I would like to go feed baby lambs, even though I'm a vegan, but sure, I'll go feed them. That'll be a lovely little moment. So yeah, try and build in some analog things into your very digital life.
Amazing. Lois, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.